Good morning,
Good morning.
and thank you once again for inviting me here. I have been invited here in the past, and I loved it very much, and so I was very, very pleased to be able to join you again this Sunday. When I was a young boy, saying yes to God was easy. I said yes to join the choir. I was in the youth choir. Yes to be an acolyte. Yes to join the youth group and be active in that, to go on the retreats, wash dishes at the church dinners, usher at the special events and concerts, work the paper drive. This was back in the days when we had our own paper drives. Yes was easy. Yes was so easy for my friend and I that he became a minister, and I had always planned to be one. I wanted to be a minister, and I wanted to work in medicine. Those are my two goals. As I went into college, that's exactly what I started doing. I started studying under a pre-med program. I was also taking theology classes. I was doing both of my dreams. And then a strange thing happened. I was born with epilepsy, never knew it, didn't have it activate till I was 18. All of a sudden, learning was not as easy as it used to be. Everything in my life went into slow gear. Everything became a fight. Between the epilepsy itself and the medicine they put me on, it was like walking my life through mud. My family really didn't understand this until very recently when my sister, for migraines, had been put on the exact same type of medicine. And 30 years after the fact, she called my mother and she said, "Oh my God, now I know what Craig was trying to tell us." It's a hard thing to do. And it was so hard that I did not feel that I deserved any more the scholarship that had afforded me to go to the university. So I went to the dean, and I reluctantly, but without reservation, asked him to accept it back, to take the balance, and to give it to someone else who was more worthy. I couldn't make full use of it. It was time for me to go into the real world, which I did. And having gone into the real world now, all of 19 years old, and being a man full grown, very wise and educated, you can laugh now. I didn't need God, right? God was for when I was a child. God was to get me to where I needed to be. I was there. I was fine. We didn't have an angry parting. I wasn't mad at him for giving me epilepsy. It happens. I just didn't need him anymore, I thought. And so I turned my back on him. He didn't turn his back on me. He didn't leave me. But I stopped talking to God. I stopped saying yes. Suddenly saying no, or at least what I thought I was saying no, was much easier. But a funny thing happened. I didn't realize it at the time because I was in the middle of it. I only saw this about 20 years later in hindsight, which we know is 2020. I left and went home, and about a month after I went home, my very best friend, John, a man who to this day is my brother, whose children are my godchildren, whose family is my family, and who was in the Army, had a car accident in the service, hit his head badly. Now, he didn't become an epileptic, but he had epileptic conditions. He had the exact same seizures, the exact same problems that I was having. And suddenly, two people who were more than 5,000 miles apart were back together to help each other deal with the same situation. But I was still saying no to God. My parents had just started to go through a divorce. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom loved him to the day he died. But she could not watch him kill himself anymore. My sister was off to school. My dad had moved out of the house. If I had not moved back home in that moment, my mom would have been alone at the very worst moment in her life to be alone. But I was home. I was able to help her financially to some degree, and I was able to help her a lot emotionally, and she helped me. But I was still saying no, I thought, to God. My dad, alcoholic, died 6 years later. If my original plans had gone to fruition, I would have gone to school originally on the ROTC scholarship. Before I found out I was an epileptic, I'd have been posted to some place somewhere around the world. I would not have been able to spend the last 6 years of my dad's life with him. I was. And I learned a lot in those last 6 years. Both what he wanted to teach me and what he never intended to teach me, I still learned. But I was saying no to God, right? God wasn't involved in all of this. And I finally, if I had not gone home at that time, I would not have met the woman probably who was a Methodist. I was not raised a Methodist. I was raised in a Reformed church, who after many, many years of me saying, no, I don't want to go to church anymore, dragged me kicking and screaming back to church. She dragged me back to God. Now, a funny thing happened. God remembered my earlier desires from when I was little. He remembered I wanted to be a minister. He remembered I wanted to be in healthcare. And I do. I've worked in healthcare now since 1992. So that part of my dream was coming true. I'm an operations manager and a purchasing agent in a large institutional pharmacy. I make 10,000, 20,000 people's lives every day a little better. And God said to himself, I'm sure, he was chuckling, I'm still going to teach him to be a minister. So I joined the Masons. Family was in it for years. I always wanted to be in it. I joined it. And if you don't know anything about the organization, it's a charitable organization. It does a lot of good work. It's not a religious organization. It's not a supplement for religion, but it has a lot of religious overtones and themes to it. And one of the things they do is they do all their work that they do by memory. And they taught me to be an orator. First in standing in front of 10 people, then 100 people, and finally in front of thousands of people. What occupation is served well by someone learning how to be an orator? We'll get back to that. Another thing I love doing in my free time, in my hobby time, I love games. I play games with all my life. And one of the games I like to play are the role-playing games. You know, you run around, you're a little elf or a dwarf or you're a spaceman. You're playing all this stuff. Very therapeutic, it's great for your blood pressure. But also ran the games for other people, for kids and people my own age and, believe it or not, older. And it had an amazing skill. It taught me to be a storyteller because I had to write and tell stories. What occupation do you think? It's handy to know how to tell a story or two. But I didn't need God. I didn't have him in my life. He was still there. He was training me and preparing me to be a minister all the 17 years that I had my back to him, and he just stood there and he laughed. I know he laughed. I know he was chuckling the whole time. So I finally go back to church. It's grudging. I don't really want to go. And Kara's going to love this because we already talked about this morning. I was raised by a strict German family. My mom is German. Her mom was uber strict. There was like no public displays of affection. My mom had some, but not many. So I'm not a hugger. I was never a hugger. You know, hi, how you doing? Shake hands, sure, maybe a little quick. That was it. I'm not a hugger. Wasn't raised that way. Well, the church my wife decided to take me to, Vernon, they're a hugging church. And I got very good, very quick at going, hi, no, how you doing? Thanks. Good to see you. Yep, nice day. Keep away. And there was this one Texas blonde dynamo, Lois, good friends of my wife, tiny little thing. She stood about there on me. She was a hugger. And Lois did not know how to deal with me when I kept saying no to her. And I kept basically, without pushing her away, but I was pushing away. And she couldn't overpower me because, she's here, I'm up here. So one day my wife and I are in the parking lot of one of the supermarkets, and we see Lois coming towards us with a bunch of bags in her hand. And all she does is she walks up to my wife, she says, hold these. No, nothing else. Just hold these. She turns back to me, catch me. And she jumps up in midair. Now I had about a half a second to decide if I was going to catch this crazy lady or let her take a header on the parking lot and split her skull wide open. Well, I caught her. And as soon as I did, this is where I get misty. She wrapped her arms around me. She whispered in my ear, gotcha. That was the last day I said no. From that day forward, I started saying yes again. Because this woman literally took a leap of faith and put her safety in God's trust and my willingness to catch her when she knew I did not want to catch her. She took a leap of faith, and it opened up my eyes. And I started saying yes. I said yes to joining the choir, because I love to sing. I said yes to going into a 34-week Bible study. I said yes so many times to that I took another one, and then I taught it 3 times. I said yes to becoming a lay speaker when they asked me to do that. Yes to being on the pastor's steering committee. Yes to becoming a certified lay speaker. And now yes to being a minister. The dreams that I had as a child had come full circle. I am going to be a minister, and I do work in healthcare. God heard my nose, and he said, I know the end game. And the end story is, you're going to serve me. You're serving me now, but you just don't know it. So yeah, I'll hear your no's, but they're really yeses. You just aren't open to that yet, but you will be. The first time I actually listened to the words that we said in the call to worship, I've heard them, I'm sure, when I was younger, but the first time I remember actually listening to those words and knowing what they meant and having an impact in my life was in the early 80s. Our youth group had gone to see Chariots of Fire. How many of you have seen the movie? Couple? It's a story, true story, based on a true story, of a bunch of young men who ran for Britain in the Olympics between World War I and World War II. And the chief characters are Mr. Abrams, who's a Jewish man, and Eric Liddell, who is the son of a Christian missionary. Eric was a world-class soccer player, and he was so fast that he was known as the Flying Scotsman. And early in the movie, they're coming out of church, and he sees a bunch of young boys playing in the field outside of the church. They're playing soccer, rugby, football, kickball, something like that. And the ball gets kicked over to him. He picks it up, and they expect him to throw it back. He says, today's the Lord's day. He didn't make this day for playing games. This is for his day. And the kids heard the lesson. But the important part of it is that years later, Eric had to stand by those words because his dream was to run in the Olympics. He got chosen to run in the Olympics, and his qualifying heat was a Sunday. Couldn't run. He had to say no to king and country because that's who he was saying no to, was to his king and to his country. That God is more important, and I'm going to say yes to God, and I'm going to hold up God's word. I will not run. Papers around the world carried the story. Liddell will not run. They didn't know what to do. Finally, after God's point had been made and God had been glorified, he moved the heart of one of the young men on his team to come forward and say, look, different race, different day. Let me take his place, and he can take mine and run in a different race. And they did that. Eric ran. Eric won gold. And God was honored. He said yes to God, and God glorified himself through him. A couple of years later, Eric said yes again. He put aside his soccer trophies and his running, and he went back to China to be a missionary with his family, which he did to his end of his days, which was not many more to go, because he died a martyr in the opening days of World War II. He said yes. Most of us are not called to that level of service. We're not called to lay down our life. There are those who are. But for most of us, saying yes to God is exactly what I told the children. It's about being present in the lives of people around us. It's what your pastor said about he learned in his class, going outside the walls of the building, going to where the people are in need, and being part of their life. And you might think this is a difficult thing. It can be. And it can be also as easy as a single word or two. I had a friend in college, our second year, before I left, my roommate. We were in a difficult situation. There was drugs being sold on campus. The guy lived in our house who was selling them. And Eric wasn't taking it well. There were threats being made against our lives if we helped the police, which we were doing. And at one point, he had cracked. I didn't know it. Lived with the man 5 months, and I did not know he had cracked. And so a bunch of us were going up to the burger place to get a burger, play some video games. We saw Eric coming out of the house, had his backpack on, full of books. And all I said to him was, come have lunch with us. I don't know why I said it. Most of the time we didn't. But that day I said, come have lunch with us. And he said no. And something said to me, say it again, come have lunch with us. Which I did. And so Eric said, all right, fine. And we did. We went up to the place, we had burgers, probably talked for hours, played video games. I can't remember the substance of what happened after that. But I do remember what happened very clearly that night when he and I got back to the room. He said, do you know where I was going when I met you guys? And I said, well, the library, I guess. You had all your books. He said, yeah, no. I had all my books in my backpack so they would weigh me down when I threw myself in the river. He was going to kill himself. I didn't know that. I lived with him 5 months. I didn't know he was on the verge of suicide. God did. And all it took to save his life was a will you come to lunch with us? Now, I don't know what the impact of his life is going to be. I don't need to. God will. The impact of his life being saved might not be felt for centuries, and it might never be felt. Doesn't matter. God knows. And if you think a single life can't make a difference, I'm going to share with you a story. Some people say this is true, some say it isn't. It doesn't matter. The point is in the illustration. And the story goes that there was a man who was a farmer, and he had a neighbor who had a young boy. The boy got in trouble in the woods. He started drowning in a bog. The neighbor heard him, risked his life, and saved the boy. The boy grows up. He's Fleming. He's the man who invents penicillin. Penicillin has saved tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of lives by now. And if the story ended there, it'd be a pretty cool story. And it doesn't. The man who saved him had a son who would have died if it wasn't for penicillin. So the man saves his son by saving the boy. And just like the TV infomercials, wait, there's more. Because the family name of the man who was the farmer is Churchill. Yes, that Churchill. And his son is Winston Churchill. The same Winston Churchill who grows up to lead Britain through the Blitz, helped defeat Germany in the Axis. No one can argue, changed the world for all time to come. All of that because one boy was saved from drowning. Farmer didn't know that at the time. How could he? There was no way to know that. Didn't matter. God called him, and he said, here I am, Lord. So when you leave the walls today of this place, of this holy sanctuary, God will call you at some point. It might be today, it might be tonight, it might be in the next 3 months, I don't know. But when he does, think very carefully before you say no, because he'll probably find a way to turn it to yes anyway. So don't fight him. Just go along with it. Take that leap of faith, because someone's going to be out there to catch you. And if it's no one else, it'll be Christ. Amen.